DEI consultants adjust to executive orders shifting focus. Diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants are adapting to President Donald Trump's executive order targeting such programs by rebuilding training to focus on topics such as mental health, neurodiversity, and generational differences. A report from the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at New York University Law and Catalyst found that 78% of executives plan to rebrand DEI programs as employee engagement or workplace culture. If it means we've got to contort ourselves a little bit to keep going for now, that's what we have to do, says DEI consultant Aaron Reeves. They're literally just lying to you at this point. Like, they've been lying for ages, but now they're being blatant about, like, yeah, we're lying, you know that we're lying, and we know you know that we're lying. So we're just gonna tell you that we're lying, and the majority of people are gonna be too dumb to take it seriously, and so we're going to keep gaining ground. So I'll open this one. The DEI industry, scorned by the White House, turns to safer topics. To avoid government scrutiny, companies are asking for fewer trainings focused on race and gender, and more on neurodivergence and generational differences. And we read an article at the beginning of this year where they had already started trying to bring intersectionality with race and disability. So they've already been trying to smush these things together to obfuscate how they're going to keep doing things along racial lines. And you're going to be a bigot if you point it out, because how dare you be bad to the neurodivergent people? When President Trump signed an executive order in January targeting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in federal agencies, schools, and the private sector, Aaron Reeves, who had been a DEI consultant for 26 years, said many in her field were in a panic. It's a shame they don't have to get a real job quite yet. All the federal government stuff, I was watching it, and I genuinely didn't even know where to go with it, Miss Reeves said. For those in the industry, she added, there was a feeling of, what do we do? For the answer, for many DEI professionals, has been to adapt to what companies feel comfortable offering. Employee trainings that maintain the principles of diversity and inclusion, but without necessarily calling them that. This has meant fewer sessions that focus explicitly on race, gender, sexuality, and unconscious bias, and more on subjects like neurodivergence, mental health, and generational differences. A training that teaches about how age affects viewpoints in the workplace. I have been saying that this is what they've been doing for like 2 years now, man. Like it's crazy. It feels very disorienting to just see them come out and blatantly say it, considering I have been doing this reporting on Bridge for so long, and other people who have tried covering it have just been like, oh, it's merely a rebranding of the language. Bridge isn't anything to worry about. When it's like, no, Bridge is the one leading all of the rebrandings. These are all companies pooling together money, pooling together talent, coming together and making an albatross against all of us who do not want DEI anymore. You're fighting this conglomerate of companies pooling together to all lie in lockstep to continue this cultural change that they want. Companies are looking for safer inclusion topics, said Miss Reeves, who is based in Chicago and whose work involves conducting research on diversity in the workplace to inform her trainings. If you have something being billed as a generational difference training, it is less likely to raise eyebrows among anybody that's looking to say, hey, is that safe? Is that dangerous for us to do right now? Yeah, it's less likely to raise eyebrows because you're using subversive language. Like, we all know what you're doing when you say generational differences. We all know what's happening here. You just gotta convince the room temp IQ people that that's what you're doing. A report by the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU Law and the workplace gender equity firm Catalyst found that 78% of C-suite executives intend to rebrand their DEI programs with terms like employee engagement or workplace culture, while staying committed to the underlying values of inclusion. I literally have a tweet from like spring or like June last year where you had to like create an account if you wanted the full article, but I got like screenshot archives of the articles, and I posted the full screenshot of the full article, and it was DEI practitioners telling you like, Yeah, too many people are noticing what we're doing, and so we have to start changing the language. I understand that it's important to have a universal language that people who want to be part of what we're doing know exactly what's happening, but we've gotten to the point where so many people are complaining we need to start lying because this work is so much more important that if we lose a couple of people who think they're no longer working towards the greater good. It's like this they've been telling you this for ages. I'm not even making up my own opinion. I just read you what these people say. They still want to have these human-centered conversations, said Stephanie Creary, an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, who focuses on organizational DEI. And so as a substitute, they're talking about generations and other less scrutinized topics. You remember how Robbie Starbuck told everyone we're winning because all of these companies decided to say, hey, we're gonna pull out of the public reporting, but we're still committed to diversity and inclusion. Remember that? Remember how tons of people on Twitter who were like anti-woke were like quote retweeting him with like, we're winning! Oh, guys, it's happening! I'm just a cartoon fox, but I've been telling you, like, we're not winning. It's not, like, nothing is happening. I think even, like, Grums responded to me, and they were like, well, we need to celebrate victories when we get it, even if it's a small victory. And it's like, it's not even a small victory if this is literally what they planned on doing. If, like, the entire plan was to get rid of DEI departments, which is what Cheryl Dijja said in her 2023 interview, she said the goal is to get rid of the siloed approach, no longer have DEI departments, and that everyone in the company just does the work as a part of their job. It's insane to me. Jessica Lambrecht, the chief executive and a co-founder of the Rise Journey, a consulting firm that hires contractors for DEI training, said she, too, had adapted to increased demand in the past year for workplace trainings on mental health, generational differences, parental issues, and how to give and receive feedback. Parental issues. Oh, I wonder what that could possibly mean with all of the trans surgeries being banned around the country. And trainings on mental health. Do you guys remember when they tried pointing out how, like, it's a mental health issue because too many right-wingers go to the gym, right? They're like, you're more likely to be right-leaning if you go to the gym, and that's somehow bad. Do you guys remember when they were trying to equate having conservative values with having a mental illness? If a client requests a training on something Rise doesn't offer, Ms. Lambrecht said she quickly finds the right expert to do it. That flexibility, she said, has helped offset a drop in business from a peak in 2022 when companies across the country increased investment in DEI initiatives. Big companies like Meta, Target, Lowe's, and Amazon have all publicly scaled back or eliminated their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the last year. An Amazon spokesperson said that the company was committed to building a diverse and inclusive company, and that it had recently started an employee development program that included training on topics like wellness. Meta declined to comment on changes to its DEI programs, and Lowe's and Target did not respond to requests for comment either. And we all know that all of these companies have not really scaled back much of anything. I think the biggest impact was Target removing the, transgendered clothing for children. They had, like, tuck-capable swimsuits or some shit for kids. I think that's, like, the biggest thing that's happened with any of these companies that were listed here. And then Target just got, like, boycotted. Americans are deeply split over DEI in the workplace, with a recent NBC poll showing that 49% thought such programs should be eliminated because they created divisions. That's way too low. That should be so much higher. Ms. Creary thinks that some of the blame for that falls on corporations that unilaterally decided to focus only on race and gender, and created the impression that the field was intended to benefit only certain identity groups. Well, even the EEOC had to clear up that misunderstanding because, yes, there are certain identity groups that are benefiting from things and have been benefiting from things for multiple decades. And it's not white people. Other professionals agree that broadening the scope of DEI could help fix what they think went wrong in the field over the last few years. This should have never been work that was niche or felt like it was siloed to specific groups, said Joelle Emerson, the chief executive of the DEI consultancy Paradigm, who has also seen rising demand for trainings on topics like neurodiversity and generational differences. There's that subversive language again. I'm going to bring up once again SHRM, and I have the SHRM video on my channel as like a standalone video, so you don't have to go through a stream to find it. But SHRM is like the HR conglomerate that kind of informs how HR operates at all companies. And SHRM last year said that They had spent too long creating division and making white men feel like they're left out. If they want to enact the cultural change that needs to happen, they need white men on board with the cultural changes that they're trying to push. And so I told you guys last year, expect to see a lot of these people changing their language to be much softer towards white men. They're going to start making white men feel like they're needed and they're necessary, but they're only doing that in order to get you to rush towards your own demise. They're not changing how these programs work. They're not actually going to be doing anything for white men. They just need white men on board to continue pushing the cultural changes they want. What if white men don't want to help people put a boot on their neck? They're going to try their best to convince you to, but hopefully most people are smart enough to see what's going on. Miss Emerson said she hoped that by focusing on a wider range of identity groups, the DEI field would generate broader buy-in from people who might not have felt seen in this work before. So literally parroting what the Sherm guy said. It's also predictable, chat. It's also tiresome. But she added that Paradigm had continued to incorporate race and gender into its trainings. Not all consultants have been able to navigate the shift to less divisive topics. Ruchika Malhotra, a DEI professional in Seattle, has seen an 80% drop in business inquiries from last year, which has forced her to dip into her savings. As a woman of color, Miss Malhotra thinks that companies are less willing to hire her, even for topics like leadership training, because they fear she will be perceived as someone who will focus on race and gender. I mean, she is. That's literally her job. So that perception would be 1,000% fucking correct. What does she mean by this? Often your identity itself seems to be the blocker or the barrier for organizations to want to engage with you in this climate. No. They're not hiring you because you're a brown woman. They're not hiring you because your work itself is divisive along racial and gender lines, and you're trying to expand that to even more divisive lines under the guise of it being more inclusive. It has nothing to do with your identity, why they're not hiring you. It's the type of work you fucking do. That fear of explicit conversation surrounding race and gender is worrisome to David Glasgow, executive director of the Diversity and Inclusion Center at NYU Law. Why does a law school have an executive director of diversity and inclusion? Why do they even have a DEI center? The problems relating to race and gender in the workplace haven't gone away, he said. It feels a lot like sweeping it under the rug. Mr. Reeves, the consultant in Chicago, said adapting to the new political landscape involved not just a change in content, but also in the strategies she offered companies to mitigate their risk. In the past year, for example, she has advised several companies on how to integrate DEI practices, including improving outcomes for women, people of color, and LGBTQ people into larger human resources teams, and how to communicate changes on diversity initiatives to employee. Okay, Reeves is different from the lady who said she can't get hired. Because I was gonna say, that's really funny. That's really funny if anyone is claiming that this has nothing to do with race or gender. And then at the bottom of the article, it says, in the past year, for example, she has advised several companies on how to integrate the DEI practices into larger human resources teams. This is BRIDGE in action. Removing the visible DEI teams, removing the visible DEI titles, and sorting these people into harder to find areas like just human resources in general is exactly what BRIDGE has been wanting to do for the past several years. DEI groups going away, DEI labels getting renamed. This is not winning. These are not small victories, and don't let anyone lie to you and tell you otherwise. There's a lot of negotiation of what do we want to call something, Miss Reeves said, adding, if it means we've got to contort ourselves a little bit to keep going, for now, that's what we have to do. Once again, literally just boldface telling you, we are lying and there's nothing you can do about it. I want to look up David Glasgow. David Glasgow is the founding executive director of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, an adjunct professor at New York University School of Law and co-author of the award-winning book, Say the Right Thing: How to Talk About Identity, Diversity, and Justice, and the forthcoming book, How Equality Wins: A New Vision for an Inclusive America. Simon & Schuster, 2026. A nationally recognized expert on allyship. How the fuck do you become an expert on allyship? What is this nonsense? As well as the law of diversity, equity, and inclusion, David has written for a range of publications, including the American Journal of Law and Equality, the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, Time, and the Harvard Business Review. He was the lead author on Black Theater United's New Deal for Broadway. He doesn't look black. Why was he writing that? That seems to be against his teachings entirely. A historic agreement to transform the commercial theater industry. A dual qualified attorney in New York and Australia? Why does Australia ruin everything? No wonder Moot fucking hated them. David has a BA in philosophy and an LLB from the University of Melbourne, Australia, and a Master of Laws from NYU School of Law. Prior to his role at the Meltzer Center, he practiced employment, labor relations, and anti-discrimination law at international law firm King & Wood Malersons and clerked on the Federal Court of Australia. I wonder if he has ties to the fucking censorship bitches who are in the Australian government as well. A New Vision for an Inclusive America. Kenji Yoshino and David Glasgow, authors of Say the Right Thing. The authors behind the crucial read, Gretchen Rubin, New York Times bestselling author, Say the Right Thing, returned with this groundbreaking manifesto for the reimagining the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a divided America. The work of DEI has faced a relentless political and legal assault. Without a clear path forward, progress toward fairness in our workplaces, universities, schools, and other institutions risks grinding to a halt. So how do we build a more just world when the old playbook is no longer viable? I really like this sentence. Progress toward fairness is grinding to a halt. The only way to achieve fairness is to look at minorities and tell them that they'll never be as good as white people, or look at women and tell them they'll never be as good as men. And so they need all of these legs up and advantages and unfair access in order to compete. That's kind of crazy. I love the soft bigotry of low expectations. In this bold manifesto, Kenji Yoshino and David Glasgow, founders of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU School of Law, candidly unpack where DEI went wrong and offer a daring new vision to overcome the rising barriers to equality. Drawing from their legal expertise and extensive experience advising Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits, Yoshino and Glasgow provide practical research-backed guidance for employees seeking respectful workplaces, parents concerned about school culture, and organizational leaders striving for success in a rapidly diversifying nation. In an era where equality feels imperiled, How Equality Wins provides an urgent and hopeful call to action. I want to learn about Mr. Kenji here, because this is the first time I've heard his name. Kenji Yoshino is the Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor. What the fuck? That's a long title. Of Constitutional Law at NYU School of Law, and the director of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Yoshino has published in major academic journals, including the Harvard Law Review, Stanford Law Review, and Yale Law Journal, and has written for the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Washington Post. Yoshino is the author of 4 books, including Covering and Say the Right Thing, co-authored with David Glasgow.
I want to talk to you today about the power of authenticity.
Oh, he got gay accent real bad.
A word and concept, covering, in the hopes that it might unlock that power for all of us listening today. So I've had some occasion to think about authenticity and coming to terms with my own identity as a gay man. And I think of that journey as moving through 3 weakening phases of coerced conformity: the pressure to convert, the pressure to pass, and finally, the pressure to cover.
I like his tie.
So to begin with the power of authenticity and the demand to convert.
This is TEDx, not TED.
I
What's the difference?
Back to when I left college and went off to graduate school and finally came to terms with the fact that I was gay. These are very dark times in my life. In fact, the only consistent foray I made from my dormitory was to go to the college chapel, where I prayed to gods I wasn't even sure I believed in for conversion, because I thought that that was the only way, this is 1991, that I could live a fulfilling professional or personal life. It's very difficult for me to remember that young man knelt down in prayer because he so ardently willed the annihilation of the human being that I have become. To see him clearly is to feel the outlines of my present self grow fainter. It was only after I left grad school and went to law school that I moved from the conversion demand to the passing demand, where I accepted the fact that I was gay, but still masked that fact from others. Unfortunately for that grand plan,
I don't really know if it was masked,
year in the entire history of the law school that it offered a course titled
Kirsche in
Sexual
college. This is the
Orientation
result.
and the Law. I desperately wanted to take this
3.9K
class,
views.
but I worried that if I did, I would effectively be outing myself to the very tight-knit law school community. So I went to the professor during his office hours to ask for just to cast my net out onto the academic literature, and I found my word in the work of sociologist Irving Goffman, where Goffman says, people who are quite willing to say they belong to a stigmatized group often expend an enormous amount of energy keeping that identity from looming large in their interactions with others. And he called that...
I feel like that's incredibly incorrect, because the majority of people we interact with that are part of a perceived marginalized group are in fact very fucking loud about it. I almost can't shut up about it. So I don't know what he means by this.
That strategy covering. And when I found that word, it was as if a light bulb went off over my head, because I understood so many things about my life that I hadn't understood before. And covering has become an obsession for me in the 2 decades that have elapsed since I first found that term. So I think it's become an obsession for at least 3 reasons. First, covering is truly universal. When we're talking about conversion or passing, only certain groups are going to be subjected to those demands. These are the groups that people think have identities that can be changed or hidden. So religious minorities, sexual minorities will be subjected to the conversion or passing demands. But women and racial minorities will generally not be subjected to those demands. Notice what happens, though, when we get to covering.
Well, yeah, if you went to, like, a black man and you were like, we're gonna suck out all your melanin, you're gonna be white, everyone would be like, you can't do that. That's not we don't have that technology. I don't know what he means by that. By the way, he's gay. Just wanted to make sure you knew. You're fucking Asian. Asians are accepted as a part of society. He's talking about how he didn't accept himself as being gay, and so he tried to pray to convert to being straight because he didn't accept himself. But it's like that sounds like a you thing. I mean, I could probably give him a pass because, again, his age is like, where was he? He was born in 1969. So, like, yeah, I could believe that when he was, like, in his 20s or so, he probably faced fucking discrimination, right? I could believe that. But in current year, like, it feels like sometimes gay people still expect there to be, like, a giant celebration when they say, I'm gay. But everyone is like, yeah, I don't give a shit, that's cool. Like, they're just treated normally now.
We will all be pushed to cover if the identity we hold is outside of the mainstream of our community. And in 2023, I think we all realize that all of us are sometimes going to be on the outside looking in. In 2023, it is not normal to be completely normal along all dimensions. But I can guarantee you that every single person listening to this talk has been subjected to the covering demand at some point in their lives. In fact,
I don't know what he means by this. Like, what specifically are you being told behavior-wise you can't do? Because, like, I mean, for the most part, I don't want to see gay guys pissing out of windows onto other gay guys, and I also don't want to see straight guys doing that. Like, I don't want to see anyone pissing out of windows, actually.
Survey that I collaborated with Deloitte on about covering in the workplace, we found that 83% of LGBTQ plus individuals reported covering. It was 79% of black respondents, 66% of women, all the way down to 45% of straight white men. So I just want to underscore that everyone really means
So 45% of straight white men also engage in covering behaviors. Is this just like censoring yourself in public? Because like, yeah, everyone has to do that. And the fact that even 45%, almost half of white men report the same thing, doesn't that kind of give whatever you're talking about zero credence?
Everyone, even the ostensibly most dominant groups in the workplace, reported significant degrees of covering. No cohort was immune.
In the workplace, you act professionally. You don't act like yourself. You're not around friends, man. Like, what? I don't understand.
The second reason I'm obsessed with covering is because it matters. It hurts. So when I think about my own life, I might not have gotten tenure if I had accepted the covering demand that was made on me.
What was
when
the demand?
When I think about my personal life, I think that if I had accepted the covering demands based on association or activism that had been made on me, I would not have married my husband. I might not even have children today. Ooh. And when I think about that, it really...
He talks about demands in regards to activism in the workplace and how he didn't want those restrictions placed on him. But I don't understand how that would have meant he wouldn't have a husband or children. I'm a little confused.
It really sends a chill down my spine. Again, going to the survey, when
how much
we asked
bet the kids are
individuals
boys?
whether covering her...
Well, there is an AMA from 10 years ago. I'm Kenji Yoshino, author of Speak Now, Marriage Equality on Trial, NYU law professor, civil rights scholar, and one of New York Mag's ethicists. I attended yesterday's Supreme Court session on same-sex marriage. Ask me anything. Hello, Redditors. I'm Kenji Yoshino, Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor of Constitutional Law at NYU School of Law, author of 3 books, including most recently Speak Now, Marriage Equality on Trial, and a gay married man with 2 amazing children. As such, I take deep personal and professional interest in the Supreme Court taking on the topic of same-sex marriage with the potential to decide this pivotal issue once and for all. I was lucky enough to be in the audience yesterday at the Supreme Court session. I'd love to answer your questions about what happened in the courtroom, my new book on marriage equality, or anything you'd like to ask. Why does the court seem to ignore the fact that intersex people exist? There's no discussion of intersex people, which should be highly relevant when arguing marriage is between a man and a woman. No, I don't think it should be relevant. What did you mean by this? What do you say to people who have difficulty discerning legal marriage from religion? Does he respond to these? Oh, he does, okay. I'm an admirer of your work, but I'm also graduating 3L who needs someone to tell him to get off Reddit and start outlining. These aren't really good questions. I'm in Kentucky and on the side of marriage equality, so I've been following the case closely. My question is, if the court decides that marriage inequality is gender inequality, is that going to be a more sweeping ruling? Nothing too particularly interesting in here. You feel like the guy means well, but he's not doing a good job conveying his message. He has a daughter and a son. Thank you, Skewky. Thank you, Skewky. Oh, okay, it's just a really big image. Kenji Yoshino, gay marriage and the importance of being equal enough in dignity. What? What did he mean by this? Now himself a husband and father, Yoshino speaks with us about the aftershocks of this ruling. My life is unimaginably different between the time the case was filed and when it was decided in the Supreme Court. I married my husband and we welcomed a daughter and a son into the world. It's truly bizarre to have social milestones track personal ones in this way. It's like walking down a corridor and having padlocked doors fly open as you approach. I don't understand what he means by this. I don't understand what he, because isn't it normal to have kids after getting married? Surrogacy? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he's just saying that it's bizarre that like he got married after gay marriage was made legal, and then after it was legal for them to adopt, he had children, but or I guess surrogacy maybe? I don't know. That's weird to me. It says how Kenji Yoshino is advising HR leaders on moving forward with DEI. January 16th, 2025. So this is this year. To say DEI in corporate America is under stress would be an understatement. Perhaps no one knows this better than Kenji Yoshino, Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor of Constitutional Law at NYU School of Law and Faculty Director of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. I'm just so used to saying equity in that. In his role leading the center, Yoshino has remained on the forefront of the latest research related to DEI and the law and its effect on the modern workplace. Yoshino will join the I4CP 2025 Next Practices Now conference in Scottsdale, Arizona, to discuss advancing DEI in a time of legal backlash. He recently spoke with I4CP about the current state of DEI in corporate America and how leaders should think about the legal risk following recent Supreme Court decisions. This interview has been edited for length and clarity. How do you describe the current DEI landscape? And he responds, I'm a constitutional law professor and I lead the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU School of Law, so my two worlds have been colliding ever since the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case. I used to think of the law as the floor that gave us minimal protections, and DEI as the culture that was built above the floor to make sure our day-to-day lives were dignified and inclusive. But now the law is functioning less as a floor and more like a ceiling that's been dropped on top of the entire enterprise. As the director of one of our few centers, if not the only center, for DEI that operates out of a law school, we really feel like our job is to raise legal literacy around DEI issues as much as possible. The big shift occurred with the SFFA case, where the Supreme Court abolished affirmative action in June of 2023. But the time since then has been equally tumultuous, and there are lots of developments that we need to keep up with. While abolishing affirmative action was a good thing, I'm glad they did that. How has the SFFA case altered the way you advise leaders to think about DEI? And he responds, I would say that the case itself communicated that we need to be careful about what we call the 3 Ps of DEI. So be careful when you're exhibiting a preference for a protected group with regard to a palpable benefit. To be considered legally risky, you must hit all 3 of those elements. If there's no preference, for example, you're doing unconscious bias training to remove all bias, that's fine. If the group isn't protected, like it's about first-generation students, you're also totally fine. And then if it's not a palpable benefit, for example, it doesn't rise to the level of something that would be an adverse employment action, like you're just having happy hour with people for pride within the LGBTQIA, that's probably not going to result in litigation. You have to hit those 3 Ps. With that said, what DEI programs do you see most at risk that companies might choose to stay away from? It's an interesting question. That's also interesting. I never heard of the 3 Ps before. So like, be careful when you're exhibiting a preference for a protected group with regards to a palpable benefit. So he's not saying don't give those benefits to protected groups, but the way you go about it has to be very, very sneaky. I want to be clear because I often hear that people are leaning out of these programs, but we like to think of it less as a cut and more as a shift in thinking, while keeping the same commitment. One of the most common things we see is people saying any kind of targeted program is legally risky. A good example would be something like the fellowships that law firms offered that said in order to have said fellowship, you have to be a person of color. That is risky. And what schools have done to get around this recently is to say that, oh, this is an African American group, but everyone can apply to join. As long as they allow you to apply, they don't have to accept you, and that is not legally risky. They can say this is an LGBTQ plus group, but if you're an ally, you can apply. You'll be able to apply, you probably won't get in, and that won't be illegal because they're still letting you have the opportunity to apply. Firms didn't jettison these programs altogether. They shifted them to say anyone can apply for the fellowships, but it's going to be thematized around the advancement of diversity and inclusion. You can apply for this no matter who you are, but you need to have shown a commitment to advancing diversity and inclusion. In our terminology, this shifted from cohorts to content. That's crazy that I just repeated to you guys what I've learned from Bridge over the past few years, and he just said it in the next paragraph. That's nuts. That's nuts, man. Can you share more about what this means? And he responds, cohorts are limited to a particular cohort of individuals, like if only people of color could apply. Content is anyone can apply, but the content of the fellowship is still themized around the advancement of people of color. That distinction took care of the legal issues. And this was also what was advised when I was reading, what are they called? They're like these bridge, like forward letters where they had those lawyers informing people on how to continue doing DEI work without losing federal funding and without getting in legal trouble. This is exactly what was being broadcast in those BRIDGE Smartbrief things. I forget what they're called. So maybe now, instead of having an affinity group that's closed, you say it's an affinity group for Black individuals or Asian individuals or LGBTQIA individuals, and allies are welcome. He's literally explaining what I just did. This is crazy. Also, a retreat or development program that historically would have only been for women to close gaps in gender representation now can't only be for women. You have to allow men to go to that program as well. But it can still be thematized around the advancement of women. Who is it more important than ever that DEI leaders are partnering with inside of their organizations? What teams need to come together to make sure programs are secure and thrive? I'm going to say, since BRIDGE is wanting to get rid of the DEI teams, DEI leaders are probably going to end up relinquishing their titles and they're going to mingle in other upper echelons of the C-suite. 3 constituencies need to come together: Chief Diversity Officers, CHROs, the General Counsel's Office, and the CEO. It's like a triangle. Not to sound too much of a Pollyanna about this, I don't know what that means, but I think one of the positive things that comes out of this is that previously, CEOs and general counsels would often say, okay, it's a diversity issue, you go deal with it over there, and we don't have to touch that. And the whole reason that we set up this different vertical is that we wouldn't have to think about it or deal with it. Now, because of the lawsuits, of course, the general counsel might get involved, because it's a potentially significant risk for the entire enterprise. And for that same reason, CEOs need to get involved as well. I've talked to a lot of diversity officers who said the downside is they used to be much more autonomous, and now everyone needs to have an opinion and clear everything with everybody. But the positive side of that is that the general counsel and CEOs are much more aware of everything that's going on. And to the extent that they are supportive, it actually amplifies air cover and resources that they have to advance diversity. What do you predict will be a major focus in 2025 as it relates to DEI? He responds, I think that at least 3 things will happen. First, I think organizations are going to have to think deeply about stealth DEI. In other words, saying that they're going to do exactly the same thing, but it may be that they won't be as vocal or visible about it. Looking at you, Robbie Starbuck, baby! Stop putting out false information. They might choose not to put it on their websites or talk about it in their speeches, because they don't want to paint a target on their chest. Even if there's no legal risk, there's a lot of social risk. So managing that is one thing that is going to go on. So stealth DEI is going to be on the rise. And once again, that is the entire point of BRIDGE. BRIDGE is not a renaming. BRIDGE is not like just another iteration of DEI, like D&I or Jedi or whatever the fuck. BRIDGE is literally the think tank for pushing all of these renamings and all of these going undercovers forward. And I don't think I need to bring up how many companies are involved in this again. It is massive. Second, I think that loud DEI, ironically, is also going to be on the rise. Certain organizations and people who occupy a different lane or are less worried about getting sued for a variety of reasons are going to have to be louder about DEI to make the affirmative case. What I mean by the affirmative case is that advocates for DEI spend a lot of time on the back foot. In part because it's not a media story to stay, I stuck to my guns with regard to DEI. The media story is that an organization got sued and then changed what they were doing. So those stories get splashed across the headlines. I also mentioned this as more and more companies were being put in headlines saying that they're scaling back or getting rid of DEI programs, because they're not actually scaling back or getting rid of, they're obfuscating and they're lying. And the articles were doing a lot of damage, and Cheryl Daija, CEO of BRIDGE, also acknowledged that these articles were doing a lot of damage because they're convincing people of things that aren't actually happening. And she said that this was a patented issue, and they need to try and get better headlines out. They're trying BRIDGE again? What the fuck do you mean again? It hasn't stopped. It's been continuously going since 2023. What the fuck do you mean again? If it was again, I probably would have given up, because I would have been like, nobody listened to me the first time. Why fucking try? Reminds you of Providence from Hitman. The people who shout woke is over do not have a fucking clue. They really don't, and it's depressing. It's really sad. We hear a lot about Ford or Lowe's backing away from their DEI commitments, but we don't hear a lot about the organizations, which are the vast majority of organizations that are staying true to the cause. I think those organizations are going to need to start being louder, not necessarily in what they're doing, but in making the affirmative case for why DEI is so important and making the business case for diversity. Bro's watching his one yearly Kirsche stream and a surprise Bridge is still a thing. I mean, to be fair, I haven't talked about Bridge in probably like since my fucking cancellation started, right? Like I've been busy. I even missed a Bridge meeting, chat. I missed a meeting. Finally, you don't come in on some ear bleeding talk. Third, which is related to both, is long DEI, as in thinking about the long game. I have been saying these people are forgoing short-term profit for long-term cultural takeover for years now. 4 years now, and it's not because I'm speculating, and it's not because I'm hypothesizing or I'm guessing. It's literally what they are telling me they are doing, and I read their words to you. It's not enough to simply engage with what the Supreme Court has said on DEI. We have to look at the broader trend line, which in part is a demographic story. By 2042, we're going to be a majority-minority nation. That's already true in the under 18 cohort within the United States. But I had my sponsors tagged and I was denigrated and libeled for saying the same thing that I read in articles almost daily, man. I hate fucking Clown World. I hate Clown World, and I hope everyone that disparaged me has nothing but terrible karma for the rest of their lives. Since 2019, the majority of college-educated workers have been women, and that survived even the effects of the Great Resignation during COVID and its disparate impacts on women. I've talked about this before. There have been multiple articles in the past that have said that the majority of college-educated people in the US has switched from men to women, and that Black women specifically are the majority of college-educated people in the country. But they're saying college educated to mean like these people have a degree, right? So it doesn't actually translate to anything meaningful. If the world is that diverse, how can you possibly hope to manage someone or even just be somebody's colleague without learning and knowing how to talk across these demographic divides? You just talk to them like they're a human being? What the fuck do you mean by this? What does he mean by this? There's not an issue in talking to someone if they don't hate you for who you are. The only issue comes in if they don't want to talk to you, and then you can no longer talk to them like a human being because you get hit with a brick wall every time. We looked at that one. This was the original David Glasgow that I read. His LinkedIn here. Executive director, co-author, how to talk about. I'm the director. They just all talk about their fucking featured Advancing DEI Initiative. The Advancing DEI Initiative is a project of the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, committed to making information on the intersection of law and DEI accessible to supporters of DEI. 2 days ago, today the Department of Justice released guidelines for recipients of federal funding on best practices for how to avoid unlawful discrimination in DEI programs. As expected, the document adopts a narrow, ultra-conservative view of what the law prohibits and allows in this area. For example, it highlights as a potentially unlawful proxy a recruitment strategy that targets specific geographic areas, institutions, or organizations chosen primarily because of their racial or ethnic composition rather than other legitimate factors. This gives the misleading impression that merely expanding outreach to find a more diverse applicant pool could somehow be unlawful. No, it's saying you can't pick people based on their race. What? It similarly highlights as a potential unlawful proxy a program that requires applicants to describe obstacles they have overcome in a manner that advantages those who discuss experiences intrinsically tied to protected characteristics. In the Supreme Court's Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard decision, the court explicitly stated that nothing in its opinion prohibits universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. This memo could make leaders nervous to make use of an exception explicitly approved by the Supreme Court. I don't understand what he means, because it sounds like the Supreme Court said that it's perfectly fine to ask someone if race has played a part in, like, adversity they've faced. I don't understand. It warns about DEI training programs potentially creating a hostile work environment. They do. There are several recent cases on this topic, and they all make clear that it's an extremely high bar to make out a hostile work environment claim. The vast majority of DEI training sessions wouldn't even come close to this bar. Again, the memo's discussion of this topic seems engineered to make people fearful of falling afoul of the law even when the risk is low. Many other examples in the memo are legally accurate, but its general tenor will likely further engender a climate of fear around diversity initiatives. It's important to take this document seriously as a reflection of the viewpoint of the Attorney General, whose office has vast enforcement powers, but I also urge you to read it with caution if using it to understand what the law actually does and doesn't allow. Someone here said, I have to push back on this. The DOJ's guidance is an interpretation, not law. Suggesting that DEI programs are or have been unlawful misrepresents what's actually in play here. The memo takes aim at things like racial balancing, giving preferences based on race, or even asking people to reflect on privilege or disadvantage tied to race. But there is no statute or court ruling that says discussing racism, identity, or lived experiences is illegal. Title VI doesn't ban all race-conscious efforts. Ooh, race-conscious efforts is an icky term. The Supreme Court hasn't done that either. This isn't neutral legal clarification, it's political. The goal is to scare institutions into pulling back on equity work, not because it's illegal, but because they're afraid it might look that way. They want it to be illegal. Treating this guidance like it reflects settled law gives cover to that agenda. The law hasn't changed, let's not pretend it has. That's crazy. So if a company targets PWIs, I don't know what a PWI is, in the Northeast because their students have historically been a better fit with their clientele, is that illegal as the guidance is written? What is the threshold that must be met for a factor to be legitimate? Because their students have historically been a better fit with clientele. Do they not realize that that could be used in order to shut out minorities from being hired as well? Like, oh, our clientele only work well with Caucasian people. We can't hire you. PWIs, predominantly white institutions. Okay. All right. So he is asking the question that I was. I've never seen PWIs before. That is going to be funny. On Friday, I had the great pleasure and privilege of welcoming Stacey Abrams to a forum hosted by the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU School of Law on the future of equal opportunity at work. Isn't Stacey Abrams like an incredibly corrupt politician? Wasn't she the lady in Georgia who got like a gajillion funding from out of state? Isn't that the lady that I'm thinking? Yeah, okay, that's her. Okay, I was like, I'm bad at remembering people, so is she some fat chick? I don't know. At a time when the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is under ferocious attack, it was galvanizing to hear her speak so powerfully in defense of those values. Yeah, I would also speak in defense of values that were unfairly benefiting me over other people. God damn, look at her face, dude. Risks of retreat. In recent months and years, extraordinary attention has been paid to the risks of diversity, equity, and inclusion, such as lawsuits by anti-DEI activist groups, executive orders, and social media companies. But what about the risks on the other side? Earlier this year, in the immediate aftermath of Donald Trump's anti-DEI executive orders, the Meltzer Center for Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging at NYU School of Law and Catalyst Inc. fielded a survey of 2,500 U.S. employees and leaders, C-suite and legal, in medium and large organizations with active DEI programs. We wanted to get behind the headlines and understand how people on the ground were actually navigating the current legal and political environment. Well, we already knew that because we follow Bridge. When we reviewed the data, one big theme immediately emerged: the risks of retreat. Whether you look at it from a talent perspective, a financial perspective, a legal perspective, or a reputational perspective, we found ample data to suggest that retreating from initiatives that promote fairness and equal opportunity in the workforce creates its own significant risks. These risks need to be factored into an organization's DEI strategy. Take these examples. 68% of C-suite leaders and 65% of legal leaders said moving away from DEI would create more legal risk for their organization. 64% of the C-suite and 62% of legal leaders said there was greater risk of litigation alleging discrimination from traditional plaintiffs, e.g. people of color, women, LGBTQ people, than non-traditional plaintiffs, i.e. members of dominant or majority groups. Once again, I'm going to mention that the EEOC says that if you are straight or white or male or any combination of those, and you have been discriminated against via DEI policies, The EEOC complaint forms are not just for perceived protected groups, they are for everyone to file. This right here is companies telling you they're more afraid of litigation from people who are more likely to bother to litigate than from straight white males who will just take it in the ass and not make a fuss. This new report, which I co-authored with Alex Pollock, Tara von Bommel, PhD, Christina Joseph, and Kenji Yoshino, helps leaders benchmark their DEI strategy against that of organizational peers, and serves as a playbook to help them navigate this tricky terrain. Please read it at the link below and let me know what you think. There's a lot of people who added to this. Talent risks. Employees strongly support DEI programs and consider an employer's commitment to DEI when making career decisions. Reputational risks, blah, blah, blah. Introduction, the backdrop, the response. Here we go. Organizations tend to adopt one of three possible responses to the current landscape, what Catalyst calls fight, flight, or finesse. Fight is staying the course with minimal or no adjustments. Flight is withdrawing considerably or fully abandoning previously established DEI programs. Finesse is sustaining commitment to the underlying values of diversity, equity, and inclusion while shifting strategy and execution. I like how they call it finesse, because when someone gets finessed, they got taken advantage of, they got lied to, they got ripped off, they got gypped. That's what's happening. The risks of retreat. Organizations face a threat of talent drain if they pull back from diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. More than 3 out of 4 employees say they are more likely to stay with their employer long term if their employer continues to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Conversely, more than 2 out of every 5 employees say they will quit if their employer doesn't continue to support DEI, with rates even higher among specific subgroups including women, Gen Z, and millennial employees. If you don't keep giving me preferential treatment, I will quit. It's amazing how when people are finally going to get treated equally, they've been so used to privilege and preference that it feels like they're being discriminated against just to be treated in actual equality. With many factors, including the macroeconomic environment, make a mass exodus of employees unlikely, this finding suggests a more immediate risk of quiet quitting, employees disengaging without formally leaving their jobs, which results in costly loss of productivity and innovation. Regardless of whether their employees resign or disengage, organizations risk alienating a majority of their workers if they withdraw from fairness initiatives. A white baby boomer man shared, "Such programs promote a positive work environment and make organizations more appealing." God, I hate boomers. A Latina Gen Z woman highlighted, "DEI programs make me feel safe and empowered." Both statements point to the void organizations risk creating by retreating. Indeed, one recent study found that among organizations that have rolled back DEI efforts between January and May 2025, nearly 2 in 5, 37%, reported a decline in employee morale, and 1 in 3, 33%, cited increased internal conflict or division and difficulties attracting diverse talent. Well, that doesn't really sound like it's much of a problem if it's only 37 and 33%. And also, yeah, once again, if people are no longer being treated preferentially and they're being treated equally to everyone else, I'm sure some of them feel a dip in morale because they're no longer benefiting from privilege. Beyond individual accounts, our survey reveals extraordinarily high, and in some cases, nearly universal support for the underlying values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, 99% of respondents across job levels agree with the statement, "All workers should feel respected and welcomed at work, regardless of their background or identity." Yes, because everyone sane is going to agree with this, but also everyone sane knows that that's not what DEI work fucking does. Holy shit. 99% of respondents across job levels agree with the statement. "It's important that my organization supports fair treatment for its workers, including equitable pay." Oh, see, this is where they get you. Everyone sane will agree it's important that my organization supports fair treatment for its workers. A lot of people do not quite realize that equitable is different from equal. Equitable is giving advantage to some people who should not be getting it. They're given an advantage based on immutable characteristics, and this is how they get you. In addition, between 79 and 93% of employees support 11 programs and approaches often implemented to increase diversity of talent, foster inclusive cultures, and build fair systems and structures. 93% are for employee resource groups. 92% are for creating a more inclusive work environment, e.g. nursing rooms, childcare facilities, and accessibility for disabled workers. 90% agree with programs intended to increase representation, e.g. internships, mentorship programs, and leadership training. 88% agree with training on topics like bias, allyship, and inclusion. 86% agree with workforce diversity hiring goals. 86% agree with racial and gendered hiring goals. There's no way that this question was asked in a way that normal people would normally agree with it. There's no way. 86% intentional college outreach to diversify job candidate pools, e.g. to historically black colleges and universities or women's colleges. 84% want involvement with external organizations that support DEI. 84% want supplier diversity policies intended to diversify vendors. 84% want recruitment efforts that focus on marginalized groups. So there are two things here that talk about focusing on hiring people based on immutable characteristics, which is an illegal thing. 83% want celebrations of identity, e.g. Pride Month and Black History Month. Who the fuck did they interview for this? 79% want compensation incentives or rewards for achieving DEI goals. There's no fucking way. Most employees across demographics say DEI programs are valuable. 93% of Gen Z believe that DEI programs are valuable. 94% of millennials, 86% of Gen X, 73% of baby boomers, 91% of women, 88% of men, and then the racial demographic breakdown, who think DEI programs are valuable. 88% of Asians, 96% of black people, 94% of indigenous people, 91% of Latine. That's right, it's not Latinx anymore. You're now toilets. Fuck you guys. You get to the latrine. 83% of Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders, 89% of MENA? Oh, Middle Eastern, North Africa. I always get tripped up on that one. 87% multiracial or multi-ethnic, and 87% of white people believe that DEI programs are valuable. C-suite and legal leaders also see clear benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion work. 84% of C-suite leaders and 83% of legal leaders say that their organization has seen a positive correlation between its DEI programs and employee attraction and retention. 83% of C-suite and 86% of legal leaders predict that over the next few years, continuing to support DEI programs will have a positive correlation with employee attraction and retention. I want to go back to this really quick because didn't he say, yeah, this is a survey of only 2,500 US employees and leaders in medium and large organizations with active DEI programs. So this is only 2,500 people in the US who are employees or leaders in medium and large organizations that already have active DEI programs. So all of this is going to be skewed because these are people who are deep in the DEI sauce already, and it's such a small pool only talking to those people. And much like the McKinsey study, I'm sure this is going to be pushed as proof positive that DEI is not only a moral imperative, but it is a necessary business directional decision. Fucking rigged. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Even in our survey, support for DEI programs is not unqualified, and many employees recognize room for improvement. Up to half, 46 to 52% of employees support diversity efforts with no adjustment needed. But about 1 in 3, 32 to 42%, express support for DEI with adjustments recommended. ERGs, for example, had the highest overall support among employees, 93%, but also one of the highest percentages of employees who were in favor of adjustments, 40%. Digging into specific demographic groups pinpoints where the risks of retreat are greatest. Younger generations are more likely to factor in employers' support for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs into their employment decision. And this is something that every time we read from Bridge, talking about how younger generations are more likely to be in favor of these things, I get pushback on it. And like, even if these are rigged studies where they're directly targeting people who already believe in this commie gobbledygook, that's still a subset of people. And if we go back to the, oh God, what's that talent agency? That talent agency that was just like absolutely disgusting. But there was a talent agency that polled a pretty larger pool, not a crazy larger pool, but larger pool than this. And this also wrapped into how Bridge was saying that content creators, being the new Hollywood, are going to be very important for getting the cultural messaging out. And this was one of the first things I found, even before I deeply dove into Bridge, was Campbell's Soup being one of the people that spearheaded funding for Bridge. And Campbell's also partners with like the NFL and attracts streamers with like millions and millions of subs or followers. And then they promote these like weird engagement tournaments and games that get no views, no interactions. The streamers do zero promotion for it. It literally just looks like money laundering. And it's probably also to get the streamers to talk about the cultural shift that these people want, right? Like there's no real tournament, there's no real anything. It's all just smoke and mirrors. The Creative Artist Agency, thank you. The Creative Artist Agency. And one of the things the Creative Artist Agency had mentioned in their white pages that we read on stream was that Gen Z specifically cares more about the race and gender and identity of the person selling them something than anyone else. So they're more likely to buy a product if the spokesperson for your product is, say, a black male streamer as opposed to a white female one. Streamers bought those views too. I'm sure they do, but I was talking about followers, not the views necessarily. But yeah, there's a lot of fucking botting that goes on. Men and women alike report that organizational support for diversity, equity, and inclusion influences their employment decisions, with women reporting that it impacts their intent to stay and likelihood of pursuing or accepting a role at higher rates than men. If I get offered a role that pays me a higher wage than, say, a male employee that I work with, why would I turn down a higher wage just because my company doesn't have organizational support for DEI? That doesn't make any fucking sense. That doesn't make any fucking sense, man. Younger employees are more likely to factor support for DEI into employment decisions. Again, this is only 2,500 people who are employees and executives in companies that have DEI programs. So massive fucking slant in this. But they said 86% of Gen Z are more likely to stay, 78% of millennials, 71% of Gen X, 64% of baby boomers are more likely to take a job with an organization that supports DEI, 86% of Gen Z, 74% of millennials, 64% of Gen X, and 54% baby boomers. Would never apply for a job with an organization that doesn't support DEI. 61% of Gen Z, 53% of millennials, 47% Gen X, and 36% baby boomers. Coming from the camp of people who were adamant about not taking the COVID vaccine, when you're facing a risk of being fired and not getting another job and you have a family to care for, sometimes you're not able to stick as strictly to your principles as you would like. Would it be great if just everyone unanimously said, we're not going to stand for this? Abso-fucking-lutely, but you can never count on that. And I've only ever seen it happen once in a small video game form. Like in Terra, when people started getting unfairly banned for using Terra Toolbox, like they weren't using like hacks to try and give themselves an advantage. It was for like the ping issues that Terra inherently had due to Korean spaghetti coding and also the United States being much fucking larger than South Korea. So people started getting banned for using Toolbox in general, and a good majority of the Terra player base all decided to stop paying their subscriptions to Terra until all of those players got unbanned and no one would ever get banned for Toolbox normally again. That's the only time I've ever seen it work, because so many people stopped paying for subs that En Masse Entertainment had to respond. But that was still a very, very, very small scale. I would love to see that happen on a larger scale, but I don't think that that is feasibly possible. As Asmongold called them, their luxury beliefs. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You're going to prioritize being able to feed yourself and your family over luxury beliefs. However, where it comes in that these kind of people who support DEI have an edge over the rest of us is the majority of these people aren't going to have families. They've been pushed into the childless lifestyle is the best lifestyle. So if the only person they have to worry about is themselves and not a spouse and not children, they're going to pick things that empower only themselves. And so they have a little bit of an edge in that they're going to be able to do more with their luxury beliefs than those of us. I say us because, like, I don't have kids yet, but I plan on it. Those of us who are going to have families are already do. Men and women alike factor support for DEI into employment decisions. Women, this is more likely to stay with their employer in the long term if it continues to support DEI. Women 80%, men 71%. Would never apply for a job with an organization that doesn't support DEI. 56% women, 44% men. Are more likely to take a job with an organization that supports DEI. 76% women, 65% men. So, like, as much as this is all just like commie gobbledygook and they're trying to put out these numbers from, again, a 2,500 person survey of executives and employees who already work in DEI units, this is incredibly slanted and it's going to be used to push themselves as more important than they actually are. And some people are going to take this very seriously, unfortunately. For example, leaders indicate that while they are rebranding diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the substance of and commitment to the work remains firm. 78% of C-suite leaders and 83% of legal leaders say that they're rebranding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs with terms such as employee engagement, workplace culture, fairness, or belonging. 62% of C-suite leaders and 60% of legal leaders say their company is either increasing or not changing its investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, these are things we already knew because you watch my stream and I read Bridge shit all the time. But it's still just, I bet we're going to see this study somewhere else. Organizational leaders and employees' perceptions of DEI efforts differ. The organization should completely or partially rebrand its DEI programs. It's 60% C-suite leaders endorsement, 63% legal leader endorsement, 45% employee endorsement. I think this is funny. I think this is funny because it shows that the C-suite leaders and the legal leaders understand the need to lie to people in order to advance the agenda, but the employees are just like, we just want to see what we want! Give us thing! DEI is completely embedded into everyday workplace practices at the organization, which this is the goal of Bridge. 63% of C-suite leaders endorse that, 67% of legal leaders endorse it, 43% of employees endorse it. 43% of employees, almost half, want DEI completely embedded into everyday workplace practices. That's insanity. I mean, again, this is only 2,500 people, but the fact that, like, Jesus Christ. Holy shit. DEI will become more incorporated into everyday practices. 76% of C-suite leaders endorse this, 82% of legal leaders endorse this, and 51% of employees endorse this. DEI will become less incorporated into everyday practices. C-suite leaders endorse this by 12%, 8% of legal leaders endorse that, and 24% of employees endorse it becoming less incorporated. Man, what is the path forward? Read part 2 of this. What? That was like what I came here for. I wanted to know the path forward. Assess risk from all angles. Start with a holistic review. Mitigate risk and maximize impact. Modify programs as needed based on the risk assessment. Walk the talk and talk the walk. Align communications to the strategy. And step 4 is take the big picture view. Stay the course by widening the lens temporarily and geographically. Assess risk from all angles. Expanding DEI, legal risks or lawsuits from dominant group plaintiffs or anti-DEI organizations. Expanding DEI, a legal risk is lawsuit from dominant group plaintiffs. Aw, them white people or them males, they might get uppity, but it's okay, you can ignore them, nobody cares about what they think. Action by the current administration, such as investigations, executive orders, or loss of federal contracts. Social risks are financial losses, talent losses, and reputational harm. Legal risks of retreating from DEI are lawsuits from traditional discrimination plaintiffs. And the social risks are again the same as above: financial losses, talent losses, reputational harm. Well, it looks like one is a bit more risky than the other, I would say. But as we heard in that other article, companies are more worried about lawsuits from traditional discrimination plaintiffs rather than from the dominant group plaintiffs. They just expect that white men will keep shutting up and taking it in the ass as they have for decades because none of them are going to stand up and do anything. But the traditional discrimination plaintiffs actually do file lawsuits, so they're the problem to contend with. Legal risks, there we go. Preference, protected groups. Let's see. The Meltzer Center offers a 3 Ps framework to guide a risk assessment. Each P, preference, protected group, and palpable benefit, serves as a criterion for assessing risk. All 3 elements must be present to create legal risk for an organization. Preference is refers to whether the program treats some group differently from others. Protected group considers whether the preference is tied to characteristics protected by Title VII or Section 1981, namely race, color, religion, sex, which the Supreme Court since 2020 has interpreted also encompasses sexual orientation and gender identity, or national origin. Palpable benefit asks whether the preference gives some benefit to the recipient or causes some harm to the person who misses out, such as preferences in hiring, firing, or promotion decisions. Based on these factors, a program can fall into one of 3 risk categories: green, which is low risk, yellow, moderate, or red, high. Red means that a program hits all 3 Ps, green means that at least one of the 3 Ps is absent, yellow means it is unclear or arguable whether the program hits all 3 Ps. Green means that at least one of the 3 Ps is absent. So that's saying that legally, you can have preferences for a protected group, but it can't have a palpable benefit. Or it can have a palpable benefit for a protected group, but you have to pretend that there is no preference in your hiring practices. Much like them obfuscating the ERGs, where they say we've expanded it to allies, and if you're an ally, you can join, but the point of the group is still going to be advancing things specifically for that group of people and not for you. Here are some examples here. A red one, which might get you in some trouble: adopting a quota or tiebreaker practice in which applicants from marginalized genders get an automatic bump in the recruitment process. Does it confer a preference? All 3 yeses. The yellow one says adopting an ambitious diversity target to incentivize recruitment of applicants from marginalized genders. It might confer a preference, and it does give a yes for the other 2 categories. The green one, which they say is okay to do, is adopting a structured interview process to reduce implicit gender bias in recruitment. So this is a fancy commie way to say that they're placing preferential treatment on potentially female-sounding names, but it's reducing the implicit gender bias because they're picking women and not men. But because of the way it's worded, it is not conferring a preference, and it is not conferring it on a protected group, because it just says it's reducing implicit gender bias. It doesn't say if it's favoring one or another. And it does have palpable benefit. In the top left corner of the matrix, leaders can also consider whether their organization has greater exposure to legal risk on account of being a federal contractor or federal grant recipient. It is not enough, however, for leaders to only consider the risk of anti-DEI activity. Moving to the bottom left corner, leaders should consider whether failing to implement a diversity, equity, or inclusion initiative, or diluting or abandoning such initiatives, creates legal risk in the other direction. This is a black millennial man saying, I am able to fully be my authentic self without any worry of ridicule nor discrimination. And a white baby boomer man says, organizational DEI programs help create a more common set of expectations across the community. Shifts to mitigating risk. Most risky DEI is conferring preferences. Mitigate it by avoiding preferences from lifting to leveling. Most risk on protected groups, you want to mitigate it by cohorts to content, up switching, cohorts to character, down switching, cohorts to cohorts, side switching. I don't understand this gobbledygook. How to mitigate risk. In avoiding preferences, to avoid the first P, organizations can shift from lifting to leveling, away from programs that target particular groups toward efforts that are identity neutral, but help level the playing field. For example, instead of a quota that requires a percentage of members from a protected group to be hired, lifting, organizations might identify the barriers to access for these groups and create programs that remove those obstacles, leveling. Perhaps a barrier is unconscious bias that affects hiring practices. One shift could then be putting hiring managers through rigorously designed bias training before they consider candidates, and leveraging approaches like structured interviews that can help ensure fairness and consistency in the hiring process. To avoid the second P, protected groups, an organization can consider shifting from cohorts to content, cohorts to character, or cohorts to cohorts. Shifting from cohorts to content means that instead of limiting participation to certain groups, a program is open to anyone with a clear commitment to its goals. For example, if the goal is to advance inclusion for women in the workplace, an organization shouldn't restrict participation only to women. Instead, it should allow anyone to apply, but with the understanding that they must have a clear and demonstrated commitment to gender equity and women's advancement. Shifting from cohorts to character means that instead of limiting participation to certain groups, the program would be open to all candidates who write a compelling reflection on individual experiences related to relevant aspects of identity that make them suitable for the program. For example, an organization might ask candidates to write an essay explaining how race affected their life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. This language, taken from the Supreme Court's majority opinion in Students for Fair Admissions, allows organizations to assess how a candidate's experiences may contribute to the goals of the initiative. The court deems such essays to be legally permissible because they do not automatically give a preference to each person in the cohort. Instead, the essays reflect the character of the individual who chose to write the essay. Shifting from cohorts to cohorts means that instead of developing initiatives that advance diversity and inclusion based on race, sex, or other characteristics protected under federal anti-discrimination laws, organizations could focus on other forms of difference, such as socioeconomic status, age, or disability. Or disability. The intersectionality between race and disability, by the way. As a reminder, not all anti-discrimination laws protect the same groups. Title VII prohibits employment preferences based on race, color, sex, national origin, and religion, while Section 1981 is limited to prohibiting race-based preferences in contractual relationships. This distinction allows for somewhat more flexibility, for example, in creating contract preferences for women and other groups not based on race. Additionally, while age and disability discrimination are prohibited by other federal statutes, those statutes do not allow for reverse discrimination claims, which gives organizations even greater leeway to adopt age or disability-related programs. I like how even they don't believe in the bullshit of reverse discrimination because they put it in fucking quotes. And once again, the EEOC also said reverse discrimination isn't real. If you're discriminating against a white person, that is just discrimination. There's no such thing as reverse. This is actual fucking insanity to be reading. Like, every time I read it, like, I already know what's happening, but it still just flusters me. It flusters me that it's been able to go on for this long and more people aren't really caring about it. I know there's, like, more stuff here. Walk the talk, talk the walk, take the big picture view. Like, this is a huge, huge thing on, like, what you should do. This is insane. This is also ironic. A Latina Gen X woman. As a Latina woman, it was nice to not be judged by my skin color, but by my skills. I'm sorry, but DEI does judge you that way, not by your skills. Note that participants could skip demographic questions, so totals may not equal 100% or total sample size. Interesting. So these are the demographics. Total number of respondents, 2,500. 57% were men. 10% were federal contractors. 16% were Gen Z. 50% millennials. 42% have offices and operations in multiple countries. 19% were in the energy, resource, and industrial industries. 53% of respondents were white. And 36% were in executive leadership. That's a bit nuts, man. Also, doesn't that seem a little unfair that they had a gender for this survey and they only have man and woman? It doesn't seem very DEI of you, DEI group, actually. There are more articles from this fucking July 16th Smart Brief. There's another Smart Brief after this, too. There's even one from fucking Stacey Abrams. Former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams warns companies that reversing DEI commitments to align with political changes could have long-term costs. Gee, the people forgoing short-term for the long-term cultural revolution are saying that this will have long-term costs? If companies stop marching towards the revolution, color me shocked! Abrams, now leading America Pride Rises, never heard of it, highlights how companies such as Target have faced boycotts and missed sales expectations after scaling back DEI initiatives, while Costco has maintained its DEI policies and received strong shareholder support. I'm also less sympathetic to multi-billion-dollar corporations that are concerned about losing a few contracts when they're willing to sacrifice whole communities for that purpose. Shut the fuck up. Social justice and policy, it says strategies to support LGBTQIA+ healthcare equity. Cardiologists emphasize the importance of clinician training and equitable cardiovascular care for LGBTQIA+ patients, highlighting the need to collect useful, appropriate data. American College of Cardiology webinar panelists note that low diversity in the workforce can lead to disparities, and they discuss challenges and solutions in cardiac catheterization care for gender-diverse patients. What? You don't need a gay man to give you a cardiac catheterization if you're also a gay man! I don't understand! S&P 500 firms reduce the link between DEI and executive pay. S&P 500 companies are decreasing the use of DEI metrics in executive compensation, with the number of companies doing so dropping from 52% last year to 22% this year amid pressure from conservative activists on the Trump administration. We know of cases where they decided the pay measure created too much legal risk and stopped using it, said Brian Bueno, sustainability practice leader for Farient. I don't even know what Farient is. Here's an interesting article. Responding to the EEOC inquiries about DEI programs. Employers who receive requests from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission regarding DEI programs should consult legal counsel to navigate the debatable authority of such requests, said Jason Tremblay, a partner at Saul Ewing. He emphasizes the importance of promptly gathering requested information and involving HR in the response process. God damn. God damn. What is ORSI? I've never heard of ORSI either. Authentic representation in advertising requires respect and deep understanding of bicultural experiences, ORSI CEO Marina Filippelli said. She says, cultural fluency is crucial. Inclusion doesn't happen by accident. It happens when agencies champion underrepresented partners at every stage, adding that when inclusion is prioritized from the top, it flows through the entire process. Good Lord. The David Glasgow guy that we first got from that first article, he has a speaking fee of $10,000 to $20,000. And his primary topic category is the LGBTQIA. And his second topic category is DEI and social justice. That's crazy. And you can just get paid $20,000 for this shit. That's crazy. We're never gonna parry. There's just so much, chat. When you start looking into Bridge, it's like a rabbit hole in and of it fucking self, man.